It is my pleasure to welcome to Yang Speaks the public editor of the Columbia Journalism Review and former MSNBC producer Ariana Pekary. Ariana, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you. I'm a huge admirer, as I know many people are, because you did something that dozens of people imagine doing. Millions of people are wondering why more of it doesn't go on, but you actually resigned from an MSNBC producer role because you were concerned about the nature of broadcast journalism in terms of fulfilling its function in edifying the public. And I want to start all this out by saying that you identify issues that are germane to any broadcast media news outlet, that this isn't like some kind of MSNBC is like singular. And despite the fact that I'm on air on CNN, like I 100% agree with you that these issues are endemic to essentially the medium, and it's not just an MSNBC thing. So many Americans right now are concerned that we are more polarized than ever. And I think a huge part of that in people's minds is that the media is not helping. The media is not really bringing us together around a common set of facts, but instead is kind of separating us into camps.
For sure. And that was one of my big concerns when I was at MSNBC. I definitely saw the polarization. I was living it in real time, and I could see how it affected my family at home in Virginia right away. And it's weird. I felt like the polarization was almost having it was having kind of a counterproductive effect in some ways for MSNBC. But yeah, I definitely I call it, I some ways call it the gerrymandering of the media, and everyone on the left kind of keeps getting pushed further and further to the left, and on the right, they keep getting pushed further and further to the right. And really, it's driven largely, not entirely, not wholly, but largely by, the financial incentives that are required. They gin up their audiences. And so, it's being done for profit, and a very few people are actually benefiting. So yeah, my concerns are definitely, for the democracy at large, and it plays out in many ways. Yeah.
So you started out in a different environment in public radio, and so how was that experience for you? I guess that was relatively early in your career.
Yeah, I started. Right after college, I had a crisis of identity, and I didn't know what I was going to do. So I started all first and working as a financial advisor for Morgan Stanley Dean Witter. And it was actually kind of during that miserable commute around the DC Beltway, I discovered public radio. And over a number of years, I kind of set my sights on public radio because I realized that's really what I wanted to be doing. I just loved the craft of it, and I loved the way that they told stories. I had never had a desire to go into TV. And I also didn't really do internships through college because I was, working full time and just a little bit lost in general. So it wasn't until a while after college I discovered NPR and set my sights. And I started at NPR in 2002, and loved every day from the first minute I was there.
So you were attracted to NPR, and I have to say, when I was out there campaigning around the country, NPR was like its own oasis of news. Like there were folks that listened to it. The local NPR stations seemed very free. They were very pure. You'd go in, and they had listeners who really wanted a particular version of both the news and the listening experience. You were attracted to that, and it sounds like you were there from 2002 to 2013, more or less. I mean, you were doing some other stuff, but it was all public radio directed. Is that right? Mm-hmm. It's like 11 years or so?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I just this morning I was listening. I listen to KQED frequently, which is the San Francisco station, and it's such a pleasure because the local public affairs program forum, they covered the local drug overdose epidemic and how it's gotten worse through the pandemic. And then they moved on to the new COVID vaccines for another 30 minutes. And it's this long, in-depth conversation and things that I didn't even know I needed to know. But yeah, I mean, it's just so much more and such better information that you can get.
Yeah, and NPR is supported through public funding. Though NPR now has so many listeners and sponsors and advertisers that it's largely self-sustaining, and a lot of people have also donated to it. So it's like a combination. And then you wound up at MSNBC, which it seemed like your experience was a bit different. How was the experience?
I kind of came into it with the attitude. I mean, we knew that everything was kind of, we knew that I knew that ratings played a part in our daily lives. I didn't understand the extent of it. And I thought coming in, I could bring my skills that I had in public radio. And part of that is really trying to find new and interesting and compelling stories and angles and voices. And they would want to, they would welcome that because in my mind, I felt like one of my big criticisms of cable news coming into it was the repetition. I just felt like it was, you're watching the same 5 or 6 stories kind of all day throughout the day. So I thought that was an opportunity for me to come in and, make things better, right? So I struggled with that for a few years. I tried different types of stories and I strengthened my pitches and realized, okay, they might not listen to me the first time, but I'll keep coming back and, trying to sell this other idea or strengthen my argument. Maybe they don't, maybe it's not intuitive why something is a good idea. And over time, I got a little bit frustrated, but then started to get at the same time a little bit of seniority. So I was more involved in the planning meetings, with the senior producer and the executive producer, or the senior producers. There's usually more than one. And at that point, I realized the extent that the ratings really drove all of the decisions. And it's down to, it's the first thing out of their mouths as soon as you throw out an idea. And they don't necessarily talk that way in the wider editorial meetings with the full staff. It really was in the smaller planning meetings. It's the first thing out of their mouths, like how things rated the night before, how they thought something did. And those ratings are broken down by quarter hour. So they have a pretty good understanding of what did well and what didn't do well. And so they will track the topics, of course, and they'll track the guests. So if a guest does well, or if a guest rates well, or not, they really rely on that for almost every decision. So it wasn't until the last few years when the reality became pretty stark to me, and then I wasn't going to be able to fight that fight. There wasn't. These people are just doing their jobs, and it's all out of their hands. It's out of Lawrence's hands. It's out of Phil Griffin's hands. It's at a way higher pay level, where the problems are.
Yeah, one of the things you said was that, look, these are good people, trying to do good work, but they're put in a position where their job does not necessarily produce the kind of journalism you'd want it to, which is something I completely get and empathize with. Is that if you put people in a position where their incentives are all steering them one direction, you kind of expect them to end up listening to those incentives. It's like, and if you don't listen to those incentives, and let's say your ratings underperform consistently, then someone's going to make a change. And so that's the race you're always running. Were there other people that ever expressed any misgiving? Maybe someone else from a similar background as you?
Yes. Those conversations didn't happen very often, but over the last year or two when I was there were times when I would have conversations in private with other producers. And certainly they, with a couple of people, they said, I think we're making things worse. Some seem to think that, yeah, what we're doing here is probably benefiting Trump and would help him get elected again. The person who said we are a cancer, that's one of those conversations. It was somebody in the building and has been in the business a long time. So, but it wasn't something that people talked about in the open. It wasn't until I went in and sat down, like kind of one-on-one with them. Otherwise, the notion that ratings drive everything, it's really built into the process, and it's of course, that's just what you do. And most of those people came up through the commercial TV system somehow. And I obviously have a public radio background, and none of the editorial decisions I ever made before were based on how it would rate or how big of an audience we thought we would have. I mean, we always wanted a big audience. You hope that, what you're doing is compelling enough to hold people's attention. But that's not what determines those decisions. And so for me, it was like, it really raked against my nerves every time I heard them say something like, that's not going to rate. And when it's something that I knew would be a good topic, some of the decisions were made out of ideological reasons, but it also kind of drives the division that we're seeing and the polarization in the country. So they might be pumping up, ideas that are exciting to some people, but then there was never, they don't get excited about the, someone with a more nuanced or moderate take on things. And so that just kind of keeps driving everybody apart. And there's, there's no sense that, okay, there is some benefit to compromise every now and then. I know that that's not a popular idea right now because we've gotten so far away from that. But, my sense is that when you stand back and look at the totality of, all the different ways that the financial incentives affect the content, it's just driving us down the wrong path. And it's only getting worse the way that I see it.